All right, let's get into it. We're about to dive into a major financial mystery, but we're not going to start back in the 1930s. Nope. Our first clue is actually from right now. Well, almost right now. So here's where our investigation kicks off. It's this document. Looks pretty dull, right? It's a 2017 Treasury audit of something called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, or ESF for short. And you see that date, December 7th, 2017? That's our trailhead, the start of a paper trail that's going to take us back almost 100 years. And when you dig into this report, you find some absolutely staggering numbers. Check this out, over 51 times billion dollars. And this isn't in cash, it's in something called special drawing rights. Now, what are those? You can kind of think of them as an international reserve asset, almost like a special currency just for governments and central banks. The point is, this shows us that the ESF isn't some dusty, forgotten account. No way. It's a massive, active, and very powerful financial player, humming along quietly inside the U.S. Treasury. So that's our big question, right? What on earth is this powerful fund? And where did it get all this authority, all this money? To find out, we have to follow the trail. And that trail leads us way, way back, right into the middle of a massive national crisis. Okay, Section 1, a modern financial mystery. So let's start digging. Where did this thing come from? Well, believe it or not, the first big clue is right there in that 2017 audit report we were just looking at. It's in the fund's own origin story, so to speak. And boom, there it is, right in the policy statement. The audit points its finger directly at the source, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. It says it right there in black and white. This fund was set up by Congress way back in the darkest days of the Great Depression, and it gave the Secretary of the Treasury an absolutely incredible amount of power. All right, Section 2, the gold seizure of 1934. And let's be clear, this law wasn't some minor tweak to financial regulations. Oh, no. This was a radical, earth-shattering move to take complete control of the country's money supply. It changed everything about the relationship between the government, the Fed, and even regular people. So, what exactly did this act do? Well, the real bombshell is in Section 2. It basically nationalized all the country's gold. I mean, it literally took ownership away from the Federal Reserve and put all of that power, all of that gold, directly into the hands of the U.S. Treasury. And just look at the wording here. The law says, all right, title, and interest in and to any and all gold coin and gold bullion shall pass to and are hereby vested in the United States. I mean, you can't get much clearer than that. All right, title, and interest. That's legalese for it's all ours now, completely and totally. There was zero ambiguity. The U.S. government just gave itself absolute control over every single ounce of the nation's gold. And this wasn't just about the Fed. The law also demanded that regular citizens and banks turn in their gold coins, and also these things called gold certificates. Now, what's a gold certificate? The easiest way to think about it is like a claim check for a coat. It was a piece of paper that was basically an IOU from the Treasury, a promise that you could show up anytime and trade that paper for real physical gold. And let me tell you, this was not a polite request. The Treasury Secretary at the time, Henry Morgenthau Jr., he set a non-negotiable deadline. You had until midnight on January 17, 1934, to hand it all over. That was it. And if you didn't, well, there were some very serious penalties waiting for you. Okay, so Section 3, forging a $2 billion weapon. This brings us to the big question. Why? Why go to all this trouble to seize all the gold? Well, the goal wasn't just to pile up a bunch of shiny metal in a vault. Nope. The plan was to forge a brand new, incredibly powerful financial weapon, a tool they could use to devalue the dollar and fight the horrible deflation that was strangling the economy during the Great Depression. Let's break down how they did it. And really, the plan was as simple as it was bold. You can see it here in 3 steps. First, you seize all the gold. Second, you just change the official price of it. You declare that it's worth way more dollars than it was yesterday. And third, you take that profit you just created out of thin air and use it to fund this new powerhouse, the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And that's exactly what happened. On January 31st, 1934, President Roosevelt made it official. He changed the price of gold, which had been sitting at around $20.67 an ounce for a very long time, and just like that, it was now $35 an ounce. With the stroke of a pen, the dollar was devalued against gold by almost 60%, overnight. So think about it. The government now owned all this gold, and they just made it worth a lot more. This one move instantly created a paper profit of almost $2.8 billion. And then, Section 10 of the Act kicks in. It carves out $2 billion of that windfall and says, this money, this is the seed money for our new exchange stabilization fund. All right, Section 4, Voices from the Hearings. Now, you might think a plan this radical would be pushed through in the dead of night, but that's not what happened. It was actually debated fiercely out in the open. And this is where our investigation gets really interesting, because we can actually look at the testimony from the congressional hearings back in January 34 and hear what people were saying for and against this thing. So first, let's hear from the folks who supported it. One person testified that this fund was a new and most interesting development. They saw it as a financial weapon, one that was equally effective in attack and defense. See, the argument was that other countries were already playing games with their currencies, and the U.S. needed its own tool to fight back, to defend the American dollar from what they called the invasion of similar funds operated by competitor nations. But not everyone was on board. Far from it. The critics were absolutely horrified. Listen to this from a former Federal Reserve governor, a guy named W.P.G. Harding. He testified that there is no limit on what the Secretary of the Treasury can do with that money. He saw this as a dangerous, unchecked power grab. He argued it was basically a blank check, giving one person, the Treasury Secretary, unlimited authority to deal in almost anything. He was worried this went way beyond just stabilizing the dollar. And this next quote, this is really the heart of the matter. It gets right to the core fear, and it comes from inside the central bank itself. The man speaking is Roy A. Young, who was the governor of the Federal Reserve at the time. He said, I think the Federal Reserve banks are centered on pretty much a machine, and that is why I suggested that this be not a permanent law. What he's saying is he's terrified that this new law will strip the Fed of its independence, that by taking the gold and giving this new fund to the Treasury, the government was going to sideline the Fed entirely, turn it into nothing more than a machine that just does whatever the Treasury tells it to do. You can feel his anxiety. He's practically begging Congress, please, whatever you do, don't make this a permanent law, because he sees a permanent fundamental shift of power away from the independent central bank and towards political control. This was a real power struggle. So we've got this huge fight, this controversial fund created in a crisis. What happened to it? This is Section 5, the fund's enduring legacy. And this is where our investigation comes completely full circle, all the way back to that 2017 audit report we saw at the very beginning. Well, remember how Governor Young was worried about it becoming permanent? The first version of the law actually gave the fund a temporary 2-year lifespan. But then came World War II, and suddenly its powers seemed essential. So in 1945, the Bretton Woods Act was passed, and that made the ESF a permanent part of America's financial arsenal. And as we know from that 2017 audit, it is still very much active today, managing billions of dollars. So the legacy of the ESF is this unbroken line, stretching all the way from the chaos of the Great Depression right to the super complex global financial world we live in today. This fund, born from the seizure of America's gold, is still out there, operating in the shadows, helping to shape global money policy. And that really leaves us with one last kind of chilling thought. A tool of almost unimaginable financial power was created to deal with one specific crisis. But it never went away. It's still there, sitting inside the Treasury, a permanent weapon, just waiting for the next crisis to be used again.